So the Nikon FE comes in two different colors. There is the chrome color, which most of them are, and this is the black version, which does not say FE on the front, but it does say it on the back next to the serial number, so that's how you can tell that it's an FE. As with DSLRs, you can remove the lens, like so, and you can see there the focusing screen is reflected in the mirror, and that is interchangeable. You can swap that out if you want, but most people probably don't want to do that, and there's not a huge reason to do that for most people. We have over here the depth of preview lever, or button I guess, and you can hold this down to see what the camera sees with the aperture stopped down. This dial, or I guess lever or whatever here, when you turn it towards the lens, you lock the current exposure, so the light meter that's inside the camera will, if you have it on automatic shutter speed mode, it will use that exposure, and then you can recompose and then take the photo, and it will still use that original exposure that it was set for. So if you have, let's say, something that is you want to expose for the highlights, so you aim the camera at the highlights, hold this down, and then you can recompose, and it won't be tricked by the new location that the camera is pointed at. It does use pretty much spot metering, so whatever you see in the center of the focusing screen, that's pretty much what it's going to be exposing for, and that's what the light meter will be giving you a reading for. So that's one thing to keep in mind. It doesn't have matrix metering. When you're using a flash with this camera, you unscrew this bit here, and this is where you would plug the flash into, and obviously the flash goes on the hot shoe up here. When the light shines red up here, that's your sign that the flash is ready to be used. Keep in mind that really older flashes from this era, are your best bet with this camera, and it's not necessarily critical for every application to use a flash with this camera. It may or may not be worth the trouble. So moving along to the shutter wheel, here's where you can set the shutter speed. Green is for auto mode, and when you're using auto mode, it is essentially aperture priority mode. So whatever aperture you have the lens set to, the camera will make that adjustment and take into account the light that it's seeing from the viewfinder. And then you can manually set your shutter speed as well, obviously. And we have 1/125th of a second, which is in red, and that indicates that that is the maximum speed that you can use with this, and also use a flash together with it. If you're trying to take a photo faster than 1/125th of a second, it will not sync properly with the flash. These amber colored numbers are in full seconds. When you get to M90, that is the mechanical speed, so if the battery is depleted, you can still take photos with this camera using M90. This feature was put in, I think, because back in the late 70s when this camera came out, people were more used to cameras being fully manual, and I think people didn't want their camera to be totally non-functional without a battery, so this was there to sort of reassure people that they could still use the camera even if the battery was fully depleted. When you're using B mode, that is bulb mode, and obviously the camera will keep the shutter open as long as you have the shutter button depressed. You can also screw into this attachment or into the shutter a shutter release cable, and then when you do that, it will prevent there from being any camera shake, so that's helpful if you're doing something like astrophotography. Also, if you're doing astrophotography, you can let the camera work out the exposure time itself. However, that may be many minutes long, and I recommend using a somewhat wider aperture when you're doing that to avoid the camera from taking a 20, 30, 40 minute exposure, which it will do, potentially depending on the light. Fortunately, when the shutter is open, it does not use battery, so this camera can do very long exposures, and it makes it very good for astrophotography using film, of course. So if you're into that, then this camera could be good for that application. To turn on the camera, you pull the lever back and you see that red dot. That means that the camera is on, and the light meter is on as well. So if you want to make sure that the camera doesn't use up its battery, it's a good idea to turn it off when you're not using it, and that can also prevent, obviously, an accidental exposure. We have here the exposure compensation dial, which goes from -2 all the way to +2. Most of the time you're probably going to want to leave that at 0, and this does not change the film, of course. It changes the light meter inside the camera. And similarly, we have the ISO, or in this case it's called the ASA because that was the predecessor to ISO, but it is the ISO setting. So you hold this silver button down and that lets you change what your ISO setting is, and wherever that little red indicator is, that's what ISO you're set to. And once again, that does not change what the film is inside your camera, of course. It just changes the light meter inside the camera and adjusts the sensitivity of it so that the exposure will be what it should be for that ISO. This window here you can use to tear off a piece from your film canister, the outer box that it comes in, and slide this in here, and then you can remember what film you have loaded in the camera. There are two ways to check the batteries if they're working. You can turn the camera on and look through the viewfinder, and if you see the shutter speed, recommended shutter speed indicator moving, it's an analog sort of needle that just bounces up and down. If you see that that's moving, you know that the battery is working, and also you can check by using this. And if it shines, then you know that the batteries are good. Moving along to the bottom of the camera, you can change the batteries if you need to, by putting a coin in here or using your fingernail potentially and unscrewing that, and there's a little indicator, the proper direction to put the battery in. This takes A76 batteries, which are commonly used in hearing aids, and they're somewhat readily available, but you can also order them online. This is the thread for you to screw a tripod into it. When this camera was newly released, there is an optional attachment with it which you can still buy used today, and that allows you to take photos more rapidly, but I don't really recommend that for this day and age because there's no need to spend all that money developing photos, taking them rapid fire like that. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Digital is much better for that application. But that's what these, or at least this, is for. To change the film, there's this button here. So you press this pin in, and that's sort of like a safety mechanism that prevents you from opening the back of the film, the back of the camera, when this is in its normal state. When you push it in like this, now you can change the film. To open the camera, you simply pull up here and open the camera. So the film canister goes in here, and then you insert it into there, the film leader, and make very sure that you don't touch the shutter blades because they're very fragile. And yeah, when you're done doing that, you close it up. Once you have your film loaded, you can wind the film until you reach frame 0, and sometimes you can get more than just the 36 frames that the roll of film is rated for. You can get 1 or 2 more frames, but that's how you use the camera. I would recommend this camera to someone who's looking to get into film photography but doesn't necessarily want to spend a whole lot of money on it. You can buy a camera like this for usually under $100, and oftentimes if it's closer to $100 it will come with a lens. So that's it for the review. I apologize for the cuts that I had to make, the jump cuts, because my neighbors upstairs make a lot of thumping noises, and it's just uncommon for me to get enough time to where they're not around making noises to make this video, so I had to sort of make do with it and just film it and cut out the portions and redo it when they make thumping noises. So I appreciate you for bearing with me through that. If you'd like to subscribe to the channel, I would really appreciate that, and if you're interested in purchasing a Nikon FE, you can use the affiliate link that I will eventually have below, and that will help go towards keeping the channel going and allowing me to do more reviews in the future. So thank you very much, and take care.